Before we dive into week 1 and all of the rooms that we're going to tackle, I really want to start by discussing where we should be coming from emotionally. And I want us to begin with the end in mind. Now, I know that this is not an easy topic to discuss, and I think in American society today we don't talk about death very often. It's kind of a scary topic, and I think most of us just want to pretend that it doesn't happen. But because we are so protected from death, most of us, in the sense that we, aren't at war in the way that we were 100 years ago, there aren't a great many plagues or famine. And so for most of us, we live really comfortable lives, and we kind of live in this cozy bubble, and we can kind of get away with thinking that we're going to live forever. And obviously some of us have been touched by tragedy and lost people at young ages, but a lot of us have not. And it's easy to pretend that we're going to be fine and that, we can push this idea of mortality off to the side. And so when we gear up to do this challenge, I want you to first sit down for just a couple minutes and just to think about the end of your life. And hopefully all of us will live many, many years, and this will be something that happens a long time from now. But as we think about the end, and that we are all in fact going to die, it's one of the things that I can guarantee each of us. What is that going to look like? I think we all need to challenge ourselves on our faith a little bit. I know that I've really struggled with the idea of heaven, which is funny because I'm a deeply faithful person, and I believe in Jesus and I have a very strong relationship with him. And yet sometimes when it comes to heaven, I kind of have this idea that it's just a little bit too good to be true, that it's kind of a fairy tale. Like, why would God create us for all of eternity, but then put us on earth for this short period of time? And so even for myself, I struggle with this idea of mortality and what's going to happen to me after I die. But there's really no benefit to considering any other plan other than that there is heaven and hell and we're going to go one of those places. And so, if in fact that is the situation, one, we should be living our lives to go to heaven. And I think in order to do that, we need to become really familiar with Christianity. And I love this quote from C.S. Lewis. He says, "As long as this deliberate refusal to understand things from above, even where such understanding is possible, continues, it is idle to talk of any final victory over materialism." And this is so true because, here I am and I'm talking about materialism, and, I'm trying to encourage everyone to embrace minimalism. And I think that that's really important for a whole host of reasons. But to me, the most important reason is that we need to learn how to be detached from the things that we own, because we're not going to get to take them with us. We were not made to live in this world, and because of that, none of the things we own really matter. They are merely tools to live out our life and to serve God for whatever plan he has for us. And so our job is to discern what that plan is, and then to have the tools around us in order to carry out that plan. And God wants us to love nothing more than him. He doesn't want us to love our husband or our children or our furniture set or our dog. None of these things more than him. And that's really difficult because, an easy example is our children. Like, I just love my children so much. And it's hard to think of a love that's greater than that. And so for me, while I can't comprehend a love that's greater than that of my children, the faith that I have is knowing that that is what God asks of me, and to continually lay down my will for him. That's the love that I can show him. And even though it doesn't have the same warm and fuzzy feelings that I do toward my children, it does help me I serve him by loving him. And so this thing that we're about to do, embracing minimalism and detaching ourselves from materialism, is one of the ways that I love God. I say, God, I can't see you, and you don't come and give me physical hugs in this world, but I'm still going to choose you over shoes, which are actually thrilling. Like they give you a physical thrill. Your heart races, you feel giddy and excited. I love putting on a great pair of shoes. And that feels so real, and yet it is nothing compared to loving God. And so that is what we're attempting to do with this challenge, is we're trying to detach ourselves from the material world and to choose the Lord. And it has been easier for me, I think, than some people, because I consider myself really blessed that I had a grandparent who was a hoarder. And I tell this full story in my book, Not of This World. And I talk about my grandmother. Her name was Juanita, and she's since passed. But she was what I like to call a fancy hoarder. Her house was not dirty. It was spotless. And everything she hoarded had price tags on it or was in the original box that she purchased it in. You would come into her home, and her living room would look quite normal. She had a few collections on display, some Fabergé eggs, some painted horses, but they looked tasteful, and it didn't look crazy. But what you couldn't see was that upstairs, every single room that she had was filled with boxes that were unopened. Barbies, porcelain dolls, those Bratz toys from Target. I mean, just ridiculous things. Beanie Bears. And her garage was just completely full. It was pretty crazy. And so having gone through the experience after she passed away of cleaning out her house, it just really struck me how much of a sickness hoarding is, and that I really did not want to end up like that. And I wasn't even tempted to live on that level. She had grown up really poor in the Depression. She actually lived in a barn for several years. And so I understand why she had this brokenness, but it still showed me that we all have some level of that, right? Like we hold on to things that we don't need, and going through that made me strong. And so I'm much stronger than I would have been had I not had that story. And I feel very grateful that my husband also had a hoarding grandmother. His grandparents actually were the messy, dangerous kind, where you couldn't walk through their house and there was trash everywhere, but then they would hide antique coins in the trash. And so his family literally had to go through everything. Otherwise they might be throwing out valuable things with the trash. And so he has kind of the same heart for minimalism that I do, for a similar reason, although his grandparents had a very different brand of hoarding. So both those stories are in my book. But that is just one reason why we should strive for not holding on to all of our things, because we don't want to end up as hoarders. And we can't take anything with us. And even though we don't want to think about what's going to happen when we die, the truth is we are going to die, and someone is going to have to deal with our stuff. And so much of what we hold on to is something we think, our children are going to use in the future. But let's take schoolwork, for example. My daughter just started kindergarten, and so we're starting to accumulate these cute drawings and writings of hers, and they're so sweet, and they really warm my heart. And it would be so easy for me to say, well, I'm going to save even just the best of these things to show her one day. And she may even appreciate that maybe when she's 18 or 20 and she comes home from college, and I say, oh, let's look at what you used to do in kindergarten. And we'd pull them out and we'd say, oh, that's so sweet. Look at how cute that was. And that would be a special moment. But when she's 30 and she's married and I'm downsizing from my house to a condo, let's just assume I'm going to do something like that. And I say, Rose, I have 6 boxes of your schoolwork from all of the time that you went to school. She's not going to want that. Even in that moment, if she has this kind of brush with nostalgia and she thinks, oh, I would like to see some of those things, the truth is she is not going to want to take 6 totes of stuff and put them in her house to then hold on to and give to her children. What is it that we really think is going to happen with this stuff? Okay? And when we begin to think with the end in mind, and we kind of carry all of our possessions through this story, it helps us, one, to just detach ourselves from them a little bit, but also to realize that our children are probably not going to want most of the things that we have. We don't pass on antique furniture very much anymore, and maybe you have some special pieces, and maybe that will happen. I know that I have this really beautiful statue of Mary, and it's about I don't know, this big. And I love it. It's beautiful. It was my grandmother's. I will keep it for every move that I have. When I move into that condo, the very last place that I live that's super tiny, I will take this statue with me because it's beautiful and I love it. I'm keeping it for me and I'm going to enjoy it for my whole life. And I would hope that one of my children would like it. And it's small enough that I think one of them could take it and keep it in their home and really appreciate it. But I have peace that if none of them want it, they can just chuck it and that's fine. Like, I'm not confused about the fact that you cannot make someone want your stuff, even if it means a lot to you. And so that's a small thing that I'll probably keep with me. But anything that you're storing, I just want you to think about how much space is that going to take up and how many houses are you going to move this thing through. And then, in the end, when we live in a very small place, because most people end up kind of in a small condo or retirement community or something like that, or even, in a room of their children's home. We don't have a lot of space, and so we only get to take our really, truly prized possessions with us. And so just try to decide what those things are for you. Now, in the meantime, I have a big house, and I'll probably have one or two more big houses because I have a big family. And so I don't have to be that picky about the things that I'm keeping for me. But I also don't want to hold on to things for 10 years and then throw them away when I could throw them away now. And so when it comes to Rose's schoolwork, which is kind of how I started this story, what I'm doing is taking pictures of her sweet, sweet work and creating just like a digital album of that stuff so that we can still go back and look through and say, oh, how sweet that is. But I'm not keeping the physical versions of that because I'm not confused about that story. I'm not going to keep 4 kids worth of work for 12 years of school through all of my homes, and they're not going to want it later. And so I think by asking ourselves these questions, by thinking about the end and considering, that we can't take anything with us and asking ourselves what our children will really want, it helps us to be stronger about what we're going to take. And so I don't think you need to dwell on your mortality in a big way, but I think you need to be a little real with yourself when you get ready to take this challenge and to ask yourself, why am I holding on to these things? And I have an entire chapter in my book around sentimental items, and we'll talk more about that later in this challenge. Not this week, not for week 1. We'll save that for a little bit later. But asking ourselves, what is the story of this thing? Where is it going to go? How long is it going to travel with me? And in all of the different ways that my life is going to change, is this item going to go with me? And in the end, that's what I'm asking all of us to do. I just want us to live with intention. I just want us to keep the things that we have intentionally. And I want us to put everything through kind of the lens of Christ. I just want us to say, is this helping me live the life that God has planned for me? And do I love this thing more than God? And that's a tough question to ask ourselves, but it's one that I want to encourage you to ask over and over again as you touch all of the things in your home and as you get ready to do this challenge. So I'm excited to dive on in. I think you're going to experience huge growth as you go through this challenge, and you're going to walk away feeling like a stronger person and having a much better sense of who you are and what's important to you, and you're going to end up being surrounded by things that you love and that have a lot of meaning for you. And I think that that's going to ultimately create a home that's very peaceful and wonderful for you, and that's my hope and intention for all of you who are taking part in this challenge. So let's dive on into week 1.